A young woman with striking green eyes and silver hair points assertively, declaring that the truth revealed by the evidence at the scene is that someone present is the culprit. The room brightens with laughter and praise as a man enthusiastically commends her brilliant deduction, while she modestly brushes off the compliment, only to notice a man staring at her intently. The man chuckles, denying the accusation and complimenting her detective aura despite her youth, while she nervously responds, admitting she is not actually young, and another person quietly agrees with her. Outside a detective agency, a confident man in a suit flashes a peace sign and reminds a woman not to lose her grandmother's keepsake again, as she gratefully thanks him for his help. A man's footsteps echo as he approaches a door where a woman waits nervously. He greets her and remarks that the case seems to have been resolved smoothly once again, almost as if by design. He then acknowledges the arrival of Assistant Inspector Ojira, noting his perfect timing and admitting he simply wanted to borrow the power of Nogami, no matter what. The man tries to leave, mentioning he has things to do, but the other calls out to him. They discuss the risks of using listening devices, which counts as illegal investigation, and the man wonders if he's being secretly recorded. The other insists he wants him to look at something important and pulls out an item from his bag. A close-up reveals a blood-stained kitchen knife sealed in evidence packaging. The man explains the victim was a housewife from Shibuya Ward, found stabbed to death in her own kitchen. The only fingerprints on the knife belong to the victim herself. He asks about security camera footage, noting the culprit seemed to avoid being filmed, and requests all available evidence within sight. The other man acknowledges and prepares to act. The man reaches out confidently, declaring he's ready to proceed. His hand moves toward the knife, and his eyes sharpen with focus as he prepares to examine the crucial piece of evidence. A tense scene unfolds as a man brandishes a knife threateningly toward a terrified woman, while a suited figure kneels cautiously nearby, warning him to stop and not come any closer. The man with the knife insists violently, ignoring pleas to stop, as the suited man remains calm but clearly disturbed, silently uttering the word God in shock. Suddenly, the suited man is startled by a voice calling his name, and another man greets him warmly, noting his return and commenting on his pale face, while the suited man apologizes and suggests a verbal report will suffice. The two men discuss the suspect's description in detail. He is taller than the victim by about 10 centimeters, has dyed blonde hair, an old scar above his left eye, and a snake tattoo on his right wrist. The other man acknowledges the information thoughtfully, asking if it will be useful, to which the suited man confidently replies that it will. Concerned, a man asks if the other is truly okay. Acknowledging how heavy memories of violence can be, the other man smiles lightly, saying such memories don't bother him much. He recalls the first time he showed his power to see the past back in university, prompting a flashback to a tense moment where he was nearly framed for theft by a hostile senior. The conversation shifts as the first man admits he knows the burden placed on the other, especially since he is the only one he knows who can use retrocognition. He questions if it's wrong to worry about a friend, to which the other responds with a warm laugh. The mood lightens as one man calls the other a good man, teasing him. Suddenly, a phone rings, and the man answers, saying he'll be right there, apologizing for needing to leave but promising to stay in touch. The other waves goodbye with a smile. Before leaving, the man advises to keep dangerous work moderate, warning that excessive investigations can get noticed. As he checks his phone, he wonders if he's being bugged, just as a message arrives requesting urgent help to retrieve some contents from Ortman Tech in Shibuya, emphasizing the need for discretion and speed. Under the cover of night in a quiet office, a hooded figure sits before a laptop, acknowledging the weakness of a password he just saw but clearly knows well. As a download completes, he decides it's time to leave quickly. The figure moves stealthily through a narrow alley, conflicted about ignoring advice to keep a low profile. Suddenly, a suited man accompanied by police officers appears nearby, prompting the hooded figure to consider changing his route to avoid trouble. The tension spikes as a man with a scar and a knife emerges from the shadows, recognized instantly by the hooded figure who shouts a warning. The suited man turns sharply, alert to the imminent danger. Chaos erupts as the hooded figure is grabbed forcefully from behind, struggling against his attackers. The suited man yells out a name in alarm, signaling the urgency and danger of the confrontation unfolding on the street. Police officers restrain a man on the ground as a bystander shouts that someone has been stabbed and calls for an ambulance, declaring the man caught red-handed. The restrained man is identified as Shibuya's culprit, but one officer orders silence. The man kneeling beside the injured figure grimaces in pain, pressing on the wound while angrily calling the other an idiot. The injured man, bleeding heavily, looks up weakly and asks what is wrong. Tears stream down the face of the man tending to the injured one, who is shocked to see such an expression on him for the first time. The injured man's face is pale and bloodied, while the other struggles with his emotions, uttering a quiet comma. Rain begins to fall gently on the scene, the atmosphere turning cold and somber. The man reflects quietly that it feels like rain in hell, acknowledging that it is over as he looks at his outstretched hand, surprised by the cold drops. The young woman, soaked and dirted, notices her hands look unusually small and her voice sounds strange, realizing something is off as she struggles to stand in the rain. Her field of vision seems lower than before, and she looks up through a broken window at her own distorted reflection. Confused and alarmed, she utters a surprised sound, trying to comprehend her altered state while still kneeling on the muddy ground. Suddenly, a wolf emerges from the shadows, growling menacingly as it approaches her, causing her to panic and declare the situation no joke. She braces herself, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Spotting a gun lying nearby, she grabs it but immediately panics, admitting she doesn't know how to shoot and wonders if simply pulling the trigger will work, as she aims it uncertainly at the approaching threat. Inside a dim, damaged room, a man in a white coat holds a gun while a young woman covered in dirt and grime watches him intently. She clenches her fist, determined, telling herself that with retrocognition, she can handle this. She focuses on the gun, recalling its loading method, trigger weight, and shot accuracy. Her expression hardens as she aims the gun with fierce concentration, convinced that the memories embedded in the weapon will reveal everything she needs to know. Behind her, a pack of wolves approaches menacingly through the forest. The wolves leap forward aggressively, snarling as the young woman fires the gun at them. She braces herself, shouting in pain as the wolves close in. Her hand trembles, and she struggles to maintain control amid the chaos. She clutches her injured hand, wincing and realizing the pain is real, not a dream, as she catches her breath. She senses someone approaching and hears concerned voices asking if she is okay. She exhales softly, acknowledging the presence with a quiet. Darkness envelopes the scene, broken only by a narrow, elongated window at the bottom, while a stark message declares that something is no longer useful. A young woman lies awake in bed, her expression serious and contemplative as she mutters that it wasn't a dream after all. She sits up, noticing her voice still sounds like a girl's, when a sudden noise draws her attention. A man in formal attire appears at the door, addressing her respectfully as "Milady." The woman, startled, questions if he means her as he explains relief that she has finally awakened. She struggles to calm herself, realizing the situation is real, while the man informs her that her injuries were minor and she had only lost consciousness. The young woman reflects on her memories, realizing she should have died protecting Ojira, but instead has become a girl called Milady. She questions if this is a common light novel trope where someone recalls a past life. Though her memories remain fragmented and she knows nothing of this body's past or name, she struggles with the fact that her heart still feels like that of a man in his 30s and admits needing more time to understand her current situation. Suddenly inspired, she decides to use retrocognition to grasp her circumstances better. She notices a scratching sound and turns toward a shadowed figure writing intently, wondering what the child of this body is writing. The figure is revealed to be writing a letter, and the young woman watches quietly. A knock interrupts the moment as a man politely calls out to Milady, asking if something is the matter. She responds with surprise and curiosity. The man informs her that the madame is calling for her regarding an earlier matter. The young woman, now seated on a bed, is addressed again as Milady by the man, who asks if she is all right. She responds hesitantly, still processing everything. The young woman, feeling her head foggy, asks if she can sleep a bit longer, prompting a gentle, understanding smile from the man nearby as he agrees. She quietly leaves the room, and he closes the door behind her, wishing her a good rest. Alone, she moves through a grand library, relieved to find no sign of anyone else. She decides to gather information while she has the chance but reminds herself to be selective with her retrocognition. Spotting a shelf of diaries, she considers starting there, sensing something familiar about one book. Holding the diary, she feels conflicted, admitting it's distressing to peer into a young girl's daily life, but insists her actions are purely an emergency measure with no ulterior motives. Determined, she declares that right now, what she truly needs is information, and she reaches out to open the book. Suddenly startled, she realizes where she is and questions if she fell asleep while searching the house, frustrated by the physical limits of her new body. Despite this, she acknowledges having gathered some information from the room's contents and reflects on her reincarnation, still piecing together her situation as she sits on the bed, contemplating her next move. A young girl introduces herself as Julia Moriarty, the eldest daughter of the Count Moriarty family, standing barefoot before a detailed map of the Kingdom of Saintia. She notes that although this is supposed to be another world, The official language is English. She observes from the books around her that the civilization level resembles the 19th century and suspects this world lacks sorcery or magic. Julia reflects on the accident that brought her here. The carriage she was riding tumbled down a cliff in a gruesome crash. Miraculously, she survived without a scratch and gained the ability of retrocognition. Looking at herself in a mirror, she confirms that the person inside this body became me, bringing her to the present moment. The voice of Julia's butler, Emilio, announces the arrival of Inspector Hudson, who has an urgent matter to discuss despite being relieved of her safety. Julia notes that she had also been consulting with the police, playing detective using the same power she now possesses. She contemplates that no matter what she does from now on, her course of action is set. Julia decides it is best to continue acting as herself for now and instructs Emilio to inform the visitors she will see them shortly. The butler acknowledges her command with a quiet "understood" as she prepares to face what lies ahead. A man dressed in a suit expresses his relief that the woman is safe, apologizing for causing her worry. The young woman, smiling warmly, assures him she has no injuries and invites him to speak freely. Just as usual, a cup of tea rests on a table nearby. The man sits on a couch, explaining he has come to consult about a recent incident. A robbery homicide that occurred the night before last at Colonel Hartwell's estate. The woman listens intently, asking for more details about the situation. He clarifies that the incident appears to be a robbery homicide. A startled maid recounts discovering Colonel Jonathan Hartwell's body when bringing his breakfast. The man details that the study was ransacked with signs of forced entry. The colonel was found collapsed on the study floor, with marks on his head but strangulation as the cause of death. The woman inquires if the family was unharmed. The man explains that the wife and their only daughter were safely asleep in the bedroom, while the maid was in the servants' quarters. He adds that James Ashworth, the wife's older brother, had visited but left before midnight, likely having no connection to the crime. The woman considers this information thoughtfully, asking if there are any clues about the culprit. The man admits the core issue. No evidence was left behind at the crime scene, leaving the investigation at a complete dead end. The young woman listens carefully, contemplating the situation as he leans back, considering her next move based on the clues gathered from the house. She politely requests to visit the crime scene afterward to help resolve the case sooner, showing her willingness to cooperate fully with the investigation. The man agrees enthusiastically, confident she can handle the detective work by applying her previous life's experience, though he notes the challenge ahead. She reflects on the difficulty of maintaining her role as a proper lady while conducting the investigation, acknowledging the delicate balance she must keep. Observing the butler's calm reaction, she senses no immediate problems but remains cautious, determined to avoid any mistakes that could restrict her actions. Resolute, she decides to embrace the role of the detective lady with all her strength, vowing not to falter as she prepares to face the challenges ahead with unwavering determination. The group arrives at the impressive stone residence of Colonel Hartwell, its facade partially covered by climbing ivy. A young man remarks on the lucrative nature of being a colonel, while the young woman beside him looks on with interest. They are greeted by a somber woman dressed in mourning attire, who introduces herself as Madame Mary. The young man formally introduces Madame Mary as the wife of the murdered colonel to the young woman, who politely bows and declares her name as Julia Moriarty. She pledges to fully cooperate with the investigation to swiftly uncover the culprit. Expressing her eagerness to work alongside them, the young man watches her with a serious gaze, acknowledging her role. Inside the residence, the young man leads Julia through the grand interior, explaining that although the colonel's body has already been removed, the crime scene remains untouched since discovery. Julia listens intently, her eyes widening as she takes in the gravity of the situation and the preserved state of the room. Julia stands in the disheveled study, observing the overturned furniture, scattered papers, and an evidence marker on the floor. The young man notes that all valuables appear to have been taken. Julia processes the chaotic scene, while the young man confidently asserts his assessment of the situation, setting the stage for their investigation. The man explains that the culprit entered to steal valuables but unexpectedly encountered the colonel, leading to a scuffle where the colonel was killed. The injury to his head occurred during this fight. The young woman asks if it was an impulsive murder by a thief, and the man agrees but admits they know nothing about the culprit's movements after escaping through a window. He adds that the town has been searched without any leads, and the woman suggests that seeing the culprit's appearance might help the investigation. The young woman requests permission to investigate, which is granted by the somber lady. She then reflects on her unique ability, the power to see fragments of the past by touching objects, but acknowledges it cannot be used without limits. She recalls that when she was an adult male, she could only look into the past about 10 times a day before becoming useless, and with her current body, 4 or 5 times is probably the maximum. She notes that her ability cannot be used on living targets and only reveals fragmented scenes. making it far from omnipotent. The young woman reasons that information gained through her ability cannot serve as direct evidence but is useful for finding physical clues. She notices a mark where something was placed and realizes it might be a clue, spotting an object with a round bottom that catches her attention. The vase, which had fallen to the floor, is carefully lifted and placed back onto its stand by the young woman, who smiles confidently, noting that she has positioned it correctly despite its strangely distant location. She wonders why the vase ended up so far from where it should have been. A door bursts open with a loud crash, accompanied by the question, asking if someone will be shown what just happened. A man urgently picks up the fallen vase while the young woman turns in surprise at the sudden noise, her expression filled with shock and confusion. The room fills with tension as several people react to the commotion, questioning the meaning behind the man's actions and whether the person in question is truly a burglar. The young woman, now addressed as Lady Julia, gasps and calmly requests Inspector Hudson to ask the family to explain what has transpired, maintaining her composed demeanor despite the chaos. The young woman questions the inspector about whether anything was stolen from outside the study, expressing surprise that the family would be asked about a burglary. The inspector admits he hasn't heard of anything taken beyond the room, leading her to deduce the culprit specifically targeted the study. She suggests the thief might have had inside information about the room, prompting the inspector to agree with renewed realization. The young woman announces she will guide the family to the drawing room downstairs. Introducing herself again as Julia Moriarty, she addresses the somber lady in mourning, acknowledging the pain of the sudden event and politely requests that she share her story within her comfort limits. The lady nods solemnly, preparing to recount the night's events. The mourning woman begins explaining that her husband entered his study earlier than usual that day, mentioning a visitor he called my brother. Identified as Mr. James Ashworth, Julia listens attentively, asking when the brother arrived. The woman states she guided him to the study before 11 p.m., which Julia notes seems late. The inspector reflects that this timing conflicts with prior information, while the woman explains her brother is a busy high-ranking official in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and this was the only time he could manage. The woman is asked about the content of her conversation with her husband, but she admits she does not know. Julia and the inspector exchange thoughtful looks as the woman grips her arm nervously, the weight of the mystery deepening. The young woman questions if the culprit truly never entered the study, her gaze sharp and probing. A servant confirms the thief avoided the study, prompting her to ask about the time Lord Ashworth returned home. The answer comes that it was just before midnight. She thanks the servant and prepares to move on, while another woman explains she saw Lord Ashworth off at the entrance, and that the maid Edna witnessed her brother leaving through her window. The young woman turns to a seated lady dressed in mourning, asking if she heard anything unusual the previous night. The lady, named Catherine, admits she heard noises and voices, describing a loud voice from her father's study that frightened her enough to retreat to her own room. The young woman listens intently, noting the emotional weight behind the confession. The young woman addresses the maid Edna, asking about Mr. Ashworth's return. Edna confirms she saw him leave the gate the night of the incident from her window. The maid's expression shifts to concern as she reveals this information, hinting at something significant. The maid speaks candidly to the mourning lady, explaining that unlike her husband, Mr. Ashworth goes straight home. She reveals the colonel's gambling addiction and wasteful spending had drawn the attention of unsavory individuals, making the recent incident inevitable. The young woman and others exchange uneasy glances, realizing the colonel was a disreputable man whose death brings relief to some. A sharp call for Edna startles the maid, who lowers her gaze with a sorrowful apology while sitting on a couch, her posture heavy with regret as another maid stands quietly nearby. The young woman and a man exchange a brief, expectant glance, the young woman's eyes narrowing in silent contemplation. The young woman admits that despite speaking to everyone, the information gathered remains insufficient, expressing a firm need to speak directly with Mr. Ashworth. The scene shifts to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, emphasizing the urgency as she acknowledges his busy schedule. As they walk through an ornate hallway, the young woman insists on continuing their conversation while moving, despite a companion's hesitant protest. A clock illustration highlights the timeline. The colonel's death estimated at 3 o'clock, while Mr. Ashworth was seen leaving before midnight. The young woman reasons that even those absent from the crime scene might hold crucial information, prompting a thoughtful, uneasy reaction from the man beside her. With a confident smile and a raised finger, the young woman explains that solving the case requires examining facts from multiple perspectives rather than focusing on a single angle. The two men listen intently, one quietly reflecting while the other nervously acknowledges her insight. Suddenly, a new figure arrives, apologizing for the delay, as the atmosphere shifts with anticipation. A man in a suit apologizes for his delayed arrival, explaining he couldn't find the time, While a young woman with a butterfly hairpin thanks him for making time, he is asked about the day of the incident, and he replies that he spoke with the colonel before 11 p.m. and left before midnight. The young woman questions if he is merely repeating what others said. Pressing him on what was discussed with the colonel, the man reveals the issue was money, describing the colonel as always troubled financially, drowning in gambling debts and piling up liabilities. The young woman reflects that the motive is sufficient, considering the colonel's ruinous habits and the karmic nature of his violent death. As they walk, she asks one last thing. She inquires if the man visited the colonel only once the previous night, holding a finger to her lips as she waits for his answer. He confirms it was only a single visit. The man agrees with the testimonies that being a high-ranking official is a busy job. The young woman suggests returning to the mansion for further investigation, expressing a desire to also inspect the mansion's perimeter from outside. The group prepares to continue their inquiry, determined to uncover more details. The young woman decisively instructs the group to first check the back of the mansion, despite a man nervously pointing out that the culprit fled toward the front entrance. Her expression is firm as she leads the way, catching the man startled when she suddenly stops and looks intently ahead. Kneeling on the ground, she examines fresh footprints imprinted in the soil. Noting their recentness, her gaze shifts to a nearby storage shed, considering its significance, before moving to a vantage point by a window, confident she can observe much from this position. As she surveys the area, a man hurriedly passes behind her, his face tense and anxious in the dim light. The atmosphere grows charged with urgency as the man's worried expression suggests something critical is unfolding. The young woman gestures toward the mansion's gate, instructing a guard to confirm the time a man returned home late on the night of the incident. The guard acknowledges the order, while the man who had earlier expressed concern calls out to her in surprise, questioning her insistence and pleading for an explanation as she presses forward with her investigation. The young woman stands on a bridge, her expression serious as she contemplates the structure before her. While a man behind her looks uneasy, she places her hand firmly on the stone railing, grounding herself in thought. Turning to face a shadowed figure, she offers a confident smile, acknowledging the logic of their plan. Suddenly, she staggers, clutching her head in dizziness, prompting the man to reach out in concern, worried about her condition. Regaining composure, she gestures toward the river below, assigning the task of investigating downstream, explaining the possibility that stolen goods might have been discarded there. The man considers her words thoughtfully, noting the risk involved in keeping stolen valuables for disguise. She declares that the culprit who murdered the colonel is not a robber, emphasizing the necessity of recovering the stolen items to identify the perpetrator. The man nods in understanding, accepting the importance of their mission as they stand united on the bridge. The next day begins with a determined declaration to start the investigation immediately. A man in a suit reassures the young woman with the butterfly hairpin that it's no problem and asks if any progress has been made. She confirms that both the culprit who ransacked the room and the one who murdered the colonel have been identified, urging everyone to listen carefully as she begins to recount the events. Around 11 p.m. on the night of the incident, the man was led into the colonel's study. The young woman explains the confrontation. A demand for repayment was made, but the colonel snapped, saying it was impossible again this month. At his wit's end, he suggested making merry work in the entertainment district to settle debts quickly. Unable to bear it, the man grabbed a nearby vase. The man admits to punching the colonel, who fell to the floor. Hearing the commotion, the madam rushed in panic. She quickly told the man to handle the situation and to think about his own position, urging him not to worry about her. The man recalls that after the visitor left the mansion, Edna spotted him. The colonel awoke, and though the madam tried to defend the visitor, the colonel grew furious, sparking a violent escalation far beyond the usual. The visitor, worried, sneaked back through the back entrance only to witness the colonel strangling the madam. In a desperate act, the visitor strangled the colonel to death. Afterwards, the two trashed the room to stage an escape through the window, revealing the truth of the case. The young woman asserts that evidence exists, pointing out stolen goods found in the lower reaches of the Arya River. She questions why a robber would abandon stolen items in the river, emphasizing the presence of eyewitnesses. She lists the witnesses: a neighbor who saw the visitor leaving the back door around 2 a.m., and finally, the testimony of Madame Mary, reinforcing the case against the visitor. A man angrily denies the accusation that the madam confessed to handling the stolen goods herself. While the maid covers her mouth in shock, the young woman with the butterfly hairpin calmly states this is the third time such a claim has been made. The man, sweating and tense, admits to murdering the colonel when confronted, but struggles as the young woman accuses him of hiding the wife's injuries. He recalls how his younger sister, Mary, always insisted she was fine despite the visible bruises. The man reflects on how Mary would claim she just fell whenever pressed about her injuries, But the bruises never faded. He admits to ignoring her suffering to avoid family scandals, while the young woman listens intently. The man declares he has no regrets, feeling that by committing the act, he finally protected his beloved younger sister. He resolves that he was finally able to do something, as the scene shifts to an empty, ornate room. The young woman collapses onto the bed, overwhelmed and exhausted, her long hair flowing around her as she admits her fatigue. She touches the butterfly hairpin in her hair, reflecting on Mr. Ashworth's decision to surrender himself. The atmosphere in the mansion is tense and uncertain. The maid and a young girl stand quietly, shaken by the events. The maid murmurs that the trust was betrayed by her own body, while a shadowed figure named Emilio is noticed entering the room, prompting a concerned inquiry. A sudden threat emerges as a knife is pressed against the young woman's neck, demanding she remain still. Her eyes widen in shock and confusion, caught off guard by the dangerous situation unfolding. The man holding the knife reveals himself as Emilio, angrily denying his identity and accusing the young woman of impersonation. He orders her to shut up, gripping her arm tightly as the confrontation escalates with sharp hostility. A man firmly grips the young woman by the neck, demanding to know her identity as she stands frozen in shock, clutching a small object in her gloved hand, the tension thick in the ornate room behind them. A man in a vest confronts the young woman with the butterfly hairpin, demanding to know who she is and what she has done with the real Lady Julia. She looks down, realizing there is no way to talk her way out of this. The man, sword in hand, asserts that he lacks the confidence to act like Julia well enough to clear suspicions. Convinced she is a different person, the young woman trembles as he raises his hand, pleading for him to wait. She thinks her only move in this situation is about to unfold. The young woman suddenly snaps a pair of scissors, warning him not to move while asking him to calm down and listen to her. The man, startled, turns as something bumps behind him, his expression tense and alert. The young woman swiftly kicks the man in the face, catching him off guard and sending him reeling backward, her determined expression fierce as she takes control of the confrontation. The young woman forcefully kicks the man in the face, her long hair flowing as she takes control of the fight. The man grimaces in pain while she remains determined, sweat on her brow as she contemplates the danger of fighting head-on using this body. The man swings a punch at her, but she swiftly dodges and reaches out with a gloved hand, catching him by surprise. His eyes widen in shock as she prepares to counter. She delivers a powerful strike that sends him crashing to the floor. While another figure watches silently nearby, the young woman grabs the man's wrist, applying a precise hold, and he groans in pain. She identifies the move as a restraint technique, tightening her grip, explaining that the technique is not about brute force but about safely and effectively suppressing an opponent while minimizing harm. She reflects on how close the fight was. The man acknowledges that if not for a distraction, he would have been unable to resist. She looks down at him, recognizing who he truly is. The man demands to know who the young woman truly is, his expression tense and desperate. She calmly responds that she also wants to understand her own identity, questioning if she is really herself. He looks confused and conflicted as she explains that although this is Julia's body, after the accident, her consciousness changed, revealing a different reality. She continues, placing a hand on her chest, stating simply that this is how things have been since she woke up after the accident, while a haunting image of a shattered scene lingers behind her. The man, sweating and overwhelmed, grabs the young woman by the shoulders, pleading for her to return the real Lady Julia. She replies sorrowfully that she would if she could, but she doesn't know what is happening to either of them. Tears form in his eyes as he admits his confusion and pain. The tension escalates as he warns her not to mess with him, while she quietly challenges him to test the truth of their situation. A faint chuckle escapes her lips, hinting at a deeper mystery as the confrontation hangs in the air. The young woman, clutching the man's neck with a fierce yet desperate smile, suggests that if he kills her, perhaps the real Lady Julia might return. Sweat beads on her face as she holds him firmly, challenging the grim situation. Suddenly, she coughs violently, struggling to catch her breath. While the man watches her with concern, the maid, holding papers and a diary, awkwardly approaches, noting that it seems the young woman has settled down somewhat despite her condition. She hesitantly tries to speak to her, aware of the difficult moment. The man examines a letter carefully, recognizing the handwriting as the milady's own. He asks if the young woman recognizes it, and she confirms it without hesitation. The letter, addressed to the detective holding it, requests understanding for the sudden job offer and explains the nature of the request is simple, hinting at a mysterious incident soon to occur. The young woman's expression turns serious as she reads the letter aloud, explaining that the sender cannot meet in person but promises to thank the detective once the truth is uncovered. She advises the detective to rely on her butler, who, despite being talkative, is highly capable and will be a valuable assistant throughout the investigation. The detective sits on the floor, staring at a letter signed by Julia Moriarty, while the young woman sits nearby, pondering the strange situation. She admits she doesn't understand what incident the letter warns about. Expressing uncertainty, the detective is surprised by how quickly she found the letter, and she hesitates before beginning to explain. He listens intently as she reveals she shares Julia's ability to see the past. Noting the letter seems written by someone with knowledge of future events, the detective asks her to clarify her identity, prompting a faint, unsettling smile from the young woman. She calmly declares that she is a dead person, causing the detective to react with shock and disbelief. The young woman recounts her past life as a detective in a different world, where she died protecting her best friend from a criminal. She explains that upon awakening, she found herself in Julia's body and discovered the letter, feeling compelled to confront the truth rather than ignore it. The young woman smiles gently, saying she has shared all she can for now, while the man beside her looks on with a mix of concern and contemplation. She asks if he truly believes her story despite its absurdity, and he admits understanding, though surprised by her honesty. She reflects that if he accepts her tale as fact, everything fits together logically. Holding the letter that promises a future meeting once the truth is uncovered, he resolves to act accordingly, confident the milady will keep her promise, his hand clenched in determination. The man, Emilio, pledges his full support as instructed by the milady, prompting the young woman to react with surprise at his swift commitment. He suggests they proceed cautiously for now, while she internally notes how quickly the conversation unfolded. She cheerfully declares she must teach him how to behave like a proper milady, despite his protests and awkward attempts to maintain decorum. She scolds him for sitting improperly and crawling during investigations, calling him a nag as he listens reluctantly, the atmosphere lightening despite the tension. The young woman firmly rejects the man's suggestion, insisting that he need not go to such lengths. He calmly reminds her that despite appearances, she embodies the dignity of a milady and offers his assistance if she seeks anything. The woman, with a slight sweat, acknowledges that protecting her master's dignity is indeed the duty of a butler, finding his words reassuring as she lowers her gaze. A gloved fist clenches tightly, signaling resolve. She declares that for now, they are collaborators until Julia's request is fulfilled, expressing eagerness to work alongside him. The man returns a confident smile, matching her determination as their fists meet in a firm fist bump. Surrounded by towering bookshelves, the woman reflects on her thoughts at that moment, revealing that most of her motivation stemmed from atonement for the girl trapped in possession, with a smaller part driven by intellectual curiosity sparked by the girl's plea. The scene shifts to a bright, detailed moon outside the window, emphasizing the gravity of her reflection. She admits never imagining that this path would lead her into a tumultuous upheaval capable of shaking the world. As she and the man stand close, united in purpose and ready to face the challenges ahead.